today. We're going to talk about consent, but we're only going to touch on that because it's unlikely you guys will ever need it. We're going to talk about changes to security requirements. So Principle 6 of the GDPR has really vamped up the requirements for security. It's actually the hardest principle to abide by. 1 to 5, very easy. You've got to write down a few bits of paper, do a bit of a data discovery exercise, but actually Principle 6 is the one that stings everybody. It introduces privacy by design concept and the protection of confidentiality, integrity and availability of information. So this is where you guys come in, because privacy by design is all about the influence in projects. So it's how we influence privacy protection through projects. We also have changes to geographical reach and those responsibilities. So we're no longer allowed to project personal data outside of the EEA without special permissions from the ICO. If we do so, we run the risk of landing our butts in court and getting a bit of a fine. It also introduces the need for data protection officers. So there's 3 reasons why you may need a data protection officer, but they are needed now, and if you don't have one, you could also be stung for that. It gives control to the data subject. So what we're going to talk about is the 7+1 rights, what those rights mean and how they apply and how you can abide by them. We're also going to talk about the changes to the definition of personal data, because that's a massive change now. It's not just your name and address and your date of birth and your bank details, it's a whole lot more. And of course we're going to talk about the huge fines and possible convictions. And those have been in the news quite a bit recently, so the ICO is finally starting to bear their teeth. It's not in the ferocity that I'd like to see, unfortunately. Lots of people are getting away with things still, but we'll have a little look at that. So first off, I'm going to start with a few definitions, and we're going to talk about controllers and processors. Because actually this is a really key part for everybody. Everybody needs to understand where they are labelled under the GDPR. So for example, the controller is the person or the organisation who is responsible for gathering the data. They set the rules around the data, they decide who they share it with. They're also the guys who have to gather consent. They decide the purpose for the data. So now we have to have a legal reason to process data. We're going to have a look at those legal reasons very soon, but if your data collection doesn't fit into one of those legal bases, you have no legal right to collect that data or to store it or use it in any way. They decide whether a data subject access request and other individual rights apply. So basically, a data subject can apply to a data controller who has their data and exercise their rights. But if that controller is sharing the data, it's very difficult for a data subject to go to those processors and exercise their rights. So everything is done through the controller. So the controller must control the processors. So the processor, they usually decide the security arrangements for the data. That's key. So the controller may set out rules on who you can share it with and where you must store it, but actually the processor decides how they protect it. And your controller should be checking on those requirements as well, which unfortunately we don't see an awful lot of that at the moment. So the interesting thing about processors, and this is the important bit, and it may affect you, is that if you are being handed chunks of personal data to test with, to put into your cloud applications, you must only do with that data what you are contracted to do. If you step outside, got a new idea, we could offer the customer this and I'm going to use their data to test it, you are stepping into controller realms, you potentially don't have consent to do those things with the data, and the ICO could be a little miffed, as well as your controller. You could be in breach of contract. So it's really, really important that we understand the roles of controller and processor within the realms of GDPR. So, personal data has been redefined. And this is the usual stuff, this is the stuff we're used to seeing. So your national insurance number, your bank details, all of that jazz. But now we also have online identifiers. So as the law describes, any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. That means a living person. And it could include cookies, could include your IP address, your MAC address, your clicks while you're online. So gathering behavioural data. And a very interesting one with eBay the other day. Got a lovely new cookie policy, and me being me, I read every inch of it. I've had them over a barrel, and I've been arguing with them for the last few days, trying to exercise my rights. Because in that cookie policy, They are collecting my behavioural data in order to target me with adverts. They are sharing that data with over 25 different processors, and there was no information given to me as to what this was being shared for. So I wrote to their data privacy officer and said, one, I want to know what you're sharing my data with them for, and I also noticed that I'm auto-opted in. They told me if I want to go and take my data away, I've got to go to each of these individual processors and opt out. It's not allowed anymore. Completely illegal. We have to opt in. It's got to be a choice where we have our data shared and where it goes to. Now, I can't see that 25 different organisations all need it for the functionality of eBay. Of course they don't. It's all about advertising, making a bit of money. So all of this information that they collect about me has gone off in 25 different directions in a click. And everybody who loads up eBay, they see the cookie policy and they just agree. I strongly advise you read it, understand what's happening with your data, and object where you don't agree. You have every right, and that's what this law is designed to do, is to give you back your control over your data. So we've also got special categories of personal data. Now this is the stuff you absolutely have to have consent for. So if you're part of a union, secret. Nobody can ask you for that data, and if they do, they've got to have your consent to even use it, just to store it. They've also got to be adequately protected. So the GDPR prescribes 3 key controls, which are encryption, pseudonymization, and anonymisation. Forget pseudonymization, I hate it. But it's rubbish, let's face it, it's not key control. But anonymisation and encryption are good controls. If you are collecting religious data, ethnic origin data, sexual orientation data. And I had a very, very strange event in the last couple of months where I was working with a client who was collecting sexual orientation data, gender data, in order to discriminate against folks who are applying for roles. And under the law, they're allowed to do it because they're a religious organisation. So very, very touchy subject, but they still have to get consent. They're not outside of these rules. They still have to have the permission from the people applying for roles to gather that data and to keep it. Of course, you've got your medical data and your DNA. So things like biometrics, fingerprints, this is all now personal data, and it has to have special considerations, it has to have consent, and it definitely has to be secure. So just to touch on the rights of data subject, and I'm not going to go too deeply into it because I'll bore you silly. However, we have 7+1 rights, or at least what I like to call the 7+1 rights. Others will tell you there are 7, but there is a +1 because it's rights in relation to automated profiling. So the right to be informed, we should all have a privacy notice. So everybody who's had their data collected should have access to a privacy notice that details exactly why it's being collected, how it's protected, what it's used for, and where it's going. If that is not contained within a privacy notice, or a privacy notice isn't available, complain. ICO if need be. They need to get busy. We're paying them lots of money. So the right of access is the only guaranteed right. So of all these rights, the only guaranteed one we have is to ask any organisation, what data do you have about me? And they must deliver it to us within 30 days. We have the right to, and these ones kind of go together, so erasure, erasure, restriction and objection. So we can object to our data being used, we can restrict the use of the data, and we can ask them to delete it. But only if they don't have a legal reason to retain it. So we can't phone up the police station and say, I would like you to erase my criminal record, because they've got a legal reason to retain it. We can't phone up our boss and say, I'd like you to delete all the appraisal data you hold on me. They have a legal reason to retain it, at least for 6 years after your employment. So these are not absolute rights. But in relation to things like marketing, if you're being targeted by marketing companies, they have absolutely no legal basis to retain your data once you object. None at all. They rely on something called a legitimate impact assessment. They use these to justify their marketing without gathering consent, but as soon as you object, they have to stop. If they don't, you have every right to complain to the ICO, and the ICO will act on your behalf. Wonderful. So the rights in relation to automated decision-making and profiling. So, for example, we'll talk about credit scores. You have a right to object to being profiled automatically. You also have a right to object to having automatic decisions made about you, such as you've applied for a mortgage and that's been an automated decision based on your credit score and a number of other factors, and you've been rejected. You have every right to say, I'd like human intervention. I'd like a human decision. And that's your right. I haven't actually seen this one used yet, but I'm sure it will be. You have?
Yeah, that's our industry, that's what I do.
Oh,
Automated
excellent.
decision making.
Oh, and have you had any objections? Oh, fantastic. I'll have a chat with you after, if you don't mind. Okay, so, oh, that's not looking too well. So here's a legal basis that we can use in order to process personal data. So the first one is consent, and everyone went balmy over consent. I'm sure all of you received at least 10 emails on the 20th or running up to the 25th of May saying, please give us your consent so we can continue marketing to you. Most of them were unnecessary. Nobody needed to do that. It was a normal business process, an LIA in place, and no need for consent. The only time really you should be looking for consent is where a legal basis doesn't fit any of the others, or you are collecting special categories of personal data. So absolutely no need for all of those emails we received. In fact, Morrison's got a fine over that. I don't know how many of you heard about it. So Morrison's have a match and more card, and it's like the Tesco Savers card, and they decided that for GDPR they would email their entire card list and say, we're making some changes to our data protection, we'd like your consent to continue marketing to you. And lots of people made a complaint and they ended up with a hefty fine, just for sending emails. So we've got to be very mindful about what we're doing. When I go into a client and they say, right, well, we've got to gather consent, immediately my hackles are up. Actually, no, let's look at the other legal basis first, then we'll go down the consent route. So we have a contractual necessity. So a good way to explain this is between your boss and you, or you and your employees, there is a contractual obligation. Therefore, you have to collect personal data in order to know who your employees are, to pay them, to appraise them, so on and so forth. No consent needed, none at all. Legal obligations, so we could have, for example, the Health and Safety Act at work. We need to collect things like your injury data while you're at work, that comes under your legal obligation. So we're legally obliged to do these things. That's why we collect the data. Vital interest is another one that comes under there. So your doctors, nurses, things like that, they're collecting personal data about you to protect your vital interests, so to keep you alive, hopefully. Legitimate interest and public interest. Now, legitimate interest, I've seen a lot of these that have been done very badly, and they basically put into a spreadsheet and said, yeah, we can uphold the rights, but they've absolutely no idea of what that meant. So the LIAs in place, I've challenged a lot of them already, replaced them, gone down other legal basis routes where you can. So if you can avoid legitimate interest, try to go for all the others. Only consent and legitimate interest where no other basis fits. So geolocation. So as we've already said, if you're going to send data outside of the EU or EEA, you may need special permissions from the ICO. Unfortunately, it doesn't count America. We have Privacy Shield in place. And if you know Privacy Shield, you know it's as good as a chocolate teapot. However, it's in place, it's a legal mechanism, and it can be used. I would strongly suggest other mechanisms, security, contracts, forcing, people overseas to actually behave the way you'd like them to with the data, protect it the way that you'd expect. Of course, we've got to worry about with this is the use of the cloud applications. They're everywhere. There are servers all over the world. Martin will know this very well. We had years of arguments with Microsoft over the use of Azure, over the use of OneDrive for Business. So OneDrive for Business was my biggest issue. And the reason for this is if you read the small print, they can move your data anywhere in the world at any time without telling you for maintenance purposes. And that's their get-out clause. So if you're putting data into OneDrive for Business, it could be anywhere. You have no control over where that data is going. And Microsoft make that very, very clear to you in your contracts in tiny little writing. Most people miss it, unfortunately, but this is something to consider if you are building applications that are going to manage personal data, store personal data. Consider where that data is actually going geographically. Ideally, we would keep it within the EU, we would keep it within the UK. Brexit's going to mess that up only a little. We may be recognised as a third country, we don't know yet. But the ICO are pretty confident we've got the laws in place and we won't be affected. I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. So let's talk a bit more about how development comes into all of this. So privacy by design, it's been introduced by GDPR, and it is essentially a risk assessment. So they're asking you to identify risks that are associated with personal data and the applications, tools, people that you're using, mitigate those risks as you go through. It's quite a straightforward concept. So what we ask for privacy by design is for security to be included in your risk assessment. So it's not just functionality we're looking at, it's not just the outputs, we're looking at actually securing the data within it. Security objectives should be set. So much like you set project objectives, security objectives should be up alongside those. Consideration to common threats and not so common threats. So when you're building applications, are there threats apparent just to your application? There'll be common threats that are apparent to everyone, but there may be something that you're particularly building that may have vulnerabilities that aren't so common. Are we identifying them? Are we patching them? Are we mitigating those risks? So assign mitigations and review the security risks and objectives at project milestones. So the last thing we want to do is set those objectives at the beginning of the project, get all the way to the end and go, oh, should have reviewed those because we've probably missed a bit of the mark there. So usual project milestones should be the way to go. All security-themed documentation for your project should be retained just like your project documentation, as part of it. So it's an integral part of your project. So hopefully lots of you use one of these. Now this is a very crude version, because obviously I'm not a developer. However, a secure development cycle should be in place. There should be requirements fed in from legal, from your customers, from the governance, into the design. The inputs into the design should be a threat modelling, all sorts like this. We go down to the test. Are we testing against use cases and misuse cases? You'd be amazed at how many times I've seen tests against use cases, but nobody's thought about how people break things. And if you're like me, you break things all of the time and quite often accidentally. So are we checking against those? Because that's normally where the errors occur. Excuse me. Are we using white and black box testing? Are we using pen testing to make sure our outputs are secure? Then it goes into deployment. Are we thinking about contingency? Are we thinking about in-the-field support? And of course, a security review. The amount of times I've seen a release go without a proper security review at that point. They think we should be evaluating at the evaluation point, but actually a security review belongs here as well as there. Now, evaluation, we should be looking, monitoring, response. So have you got an application that potentially you need to be responding to security incidents within? Have you got customers that will expect you to respond to those things? And then, of course, lessons learned. And it feeds back in. Keeping documentation, keeping record, regular checks, and the whole thing should be influenced by risk. All of it. Now, the risk should sit in somewhere around here. That's where your risk assessment should be. But it should be reviewed throughout the whole circle every time. And each time you learn something, it should be fed into the next project. Anytime something goes wrong, security error, fed into the next project. We all learn from our lessons. All the mistakes that we make us better developers, I'm sure. So DPIAs is another form of risk assessment, which is unlikely to affect you as a developer. It is down to controllers to do the privacy impact assessments, but they are another form of risk assessment, and they need to identify what types of data are being used, what the security threats are apparent to that, and then of course the mitigations that you're going to put in place to prevent those things happening. They need to be reviewed. Now, if you have to do one, again, it should be in your project documentation and reviewed regularly to make sure it's up to date. Any new threats should be added. Anything that's mitigated should be noted and again retained alongside your documentation. So, just some common risks. I'm probably preaching to the crowd here. But just the use of cloud, I can't bang on about this enough. There's so many people out there that have absolutely no idea what they're using. They use a cloud application and boom, it's all around the world, millions of people's personal data scattered everywhere, and you've had no control of it. Backups mean that we're going to duplicate. So not only have you put up your whole database, but you've duplicated it many times for backup purposes. So these need protection, these need consideration, make sure we're putting them in the right place. Lack of portability. So this is one of the new rights which wasn't apparent in the old DPA. We now have the right to say, actually I'd like to pick my data up from you and move it somewhere else. So again, this is very much like your access. I would like all of my data given to me in readable, usable format so that I can transport it somewhere else. And that's basically what it is. But when you're designing your application, are you able to do that? Are you able to delete the data through your application? Are you thinking about backups? If that controller leans on you to say, we've got a subject access request, we have no legal basis to retain the data, we need you to delete all this data from your application, are you going to be able to do it? Are you going to be able to go into your backups and delete it from there? You can if you consider this from project concept. So if this is something you're thinking about while you're building, you can absolutely do this. So sharing of data with third parties. So as a processor or a controller, you've got to think about who you're sharing the data with. And that means also accidental sharing. So for example, we're all sat in the room right here and say this was project documentation for a client. And we had a load of students walk in accidentally. They've had access to that screen, they've seen it with their own eyes, they may not know what it means, but is your controller aware of this? Is your data subject aware of this? And this is why we've got to be real careful with things like physical access control. Can somebody pick up a memory stick and walk away with it? So all these things have got to be considered. The protection of source code, that's a mega one, and surely that would be right at the forefront for you guys. Control of mobile devices. So this is another real tricky one. Lots of people have their own devices to access their own emails for work, but what's in those emails? How much information can someone get if they pick up your mobile device and have a look? How much is your mobile device storing on it? Is your mobile device using a cloud application for its storage? So we need to be thinking about how much information we're storing on mobile devices. Of course, we've got lack of infrastructure control, which is quite a good one. So Azure, controlled by Microsoft. How much do their employees have access to? You know, are we thinking about these things? Are we going back to Microsoft and saying, hey, I need some reassurances on this? Because at the moment, Microsoft rule the world. And what Microsoft says goes. And as Martin will know, we spent years fighting with them over GDPR. When GDPR was first conceived and we went to Microsoft and said, hey, this OneDrive for Business is no good. This does not comply with EU or forthcoming EU regulations. And they went, we're American. That was it. We fought with them for years to get things changed and they're still not great. So use of insecure protocols, poor encryption, key management, all of these are risks. So are you considering what protocols you're using? Are you considering where your encryption keys are, who has access to them, backups, so on and so forth? So all of this needs to be considered as part of your project. And these are simple, straightforward security risks. Of course, there are millions more, and there will be unique security risks to whatever application you are building. So for risk mitigations, again, we're just looking at top level stuff. This could go a lot further down, but security training for those on the project. Humans are your biggest risk. Whether they do it on purpose or by accident, they will cause you a problem at some point. Just simple things. I've sent the email to the wrong person. The wrong person now has all of that data, and you'd be amazed at that. That happens daily, all over, hundreds of times a day. I don't know if any of you heard about I think it was Harley Street, who addressed an email to its patients, didn't use the BCC option. Unfortunately, it was an HIV and AIDS clinic, and they emailed everybody, and everybody else could see everybody's name. So everybody else on that mailing list knew everybody else on that list had HIV or AIDS. That is a huge, huge breach. That is a massive infringement on your privacy. Can you imagine somebody disclosing your medical information to hundreds of people on a mailing list? It happens, and it happens a lot. That was one of the classic examples of quite a bad breach. The excuse was, oh, we had a trainee and she didn't know how to use the BCC option. It's not an excuse that your staff are not adequately trained. They have to have the right training. They have to understand their responsibilities towards data protection. If they don't, chances are, as a director, you will end up in court and your company is going to be fined. And now there are criminal charges. It's not just against the company, it can be against the individual. And we as people can bring civil action as well. So, mobile device security. How many of you are in a workplace that have a BYOD policy? Exactly, my point. So mobile devices are the scourge to me. Whenever I do an implementation of ISO 27001, I either outright ban them or I control them to a point where people don't want to connect to the network with them. That's your option. We have people losing mobile devices, we have people backing up to cloud applications. There is so much that can go wrong with a mobile device. Somebody can lose it with no password protection on it whatsoever and never tell you. And you don't know how much information they've been storing on their mobile phone. So when I put together a BYOD policy and I train people to understand it, I make it so awful that they do not want to connect their their personal mobile devices. If they have a company mobile device, it's very heavily controlled. And that's the be-all and end-all. It's the only way you can control those devices. So we insist that they have a lock to keep access to their devices secure. We insist that mobile devices have anti-malware protection. We also insist that work-related information is purged from mobile devices regularly and that this is checked. We also require things like you need to have remote wiping enabled. And if you lose your personal device, I'm going to wipe it from a distance. And that's the part that people don't like. You've got the photographs on there, they've got sentimental things. And then it comes down to a choice. You either don't connect to the company network with your personal device, or you follow the BYOD policy. And that's the kind of stuff you need to be enforcing within your projects. Anyone can walk into a project, start taking pictures with a mobile phone. We can all pose for a team photo, and behind us is all our design. You're amazed at how often that happens. So yeah, it happens. So mobile devices have to be heavily controlled. They are a big, big risk, but not bigger than your humans using them. And that's the whole reason why they are such a big risk. So security incidents under the GDPR, and we're going to talk about how and what must be reported. But this is a security incident. It's basically unauthorised use, duplication, destruction, of personal data. Any of that occurs, and unfortunately you've got to be reporting yourselves to the ICO, but only under certain conditions. So examples could be lost or stolen laptop. I don't know if you know, but there's at least 200 laptops handed in at Heathrow every week. And there was 187 last month, and 180 of them had no password protection. What? Why aren't we doing these things, even for our personal use? It just seems insane. If you're going to lose your laptop, at least have some sort of protection in place to make sure that whoever finds it or whoever's stolen it can't use it at minimum. But so many people miss these things. You'd be amazed at how many people just don't even use a lock on their devices. Anyway, unauthorised access to a cloud platform or unauthorised access to a workspace. So like we just said, we could be in here, top secret project, got to keep it under wraps for the customer, nobody can know about this is something of the future, and in walks a classroom in the wrong room. It can happen, and it does. It's awful. People putting things in the bin, in whole pieces. And people do go through your bins. This is the thing, people do go through bins. I'm one of these people, go through your personal bins, but doing a sweep of an office, the first place I'll go is a bin. I've got a recycling bin, and they look at me. I said, well, have you? Yeah, it's over there. And I can take that lid off and guarantee you the treasure trove of information I can find in there is unbelievable. The worst I've ever found in there was medical records for an employee. In a whole piece. You shouldn't be doing these things. It's disgusting, essentially. And you think, that's our data. But that's the way you've got to be thinking, is looking after other people's data in the same way you'd expect your own data to be looked after. So we can have things like network disruptions. So DDoS attacks. Who's got a PlayStation? No PlayStations at all, my goodness. Well, I'm a PlayStation and a number of other console users, but every Christmas I get taken out. Can't play my PlayStation at Christmas. They suffer a DDoS attack nearly every year. Microsoft are usually up within a couple of hours, up and running. PlayStation have been out an entire week, and that's because their failover capability is awful for a company that's so huge. They have crappy disaster recovery plans, especially in comparison to Microsoft, who have their network up and running with the same attack within a couple of hours. It's quite astounding. So emails sent to the incorrect recipient. Man in the cloud vulnerability exploited. Has anybody had this yet? No? Does anybody know what it is? Nope. I know you do. So the man in the cloud vulnerability is actually a human hack. It's not a technical vulnerability, but essentially what a telephone spoofer can and will do is phone up where possible, phone up all these businesses and say, oh goodness, I'm from Microsoft, you've got a problem. And they go, what's my problem? Oh, we've noticed you've got some things wrong on your system. He said, if you go online and download this program, I can fix it for you. Now, you'd be amazed at where this happened. I'm not going to say because I used to work there. But somebody phoned in to a call centre and he made out that he was from Microsoft and there was a problem with their cloud application. So this young lady, after her security training, had gone online and downloaded the program as instructed by the man on the phone. He duplicated the token on her machine, and that meant that he had full access. Everything she was putting in, he could see too. And he says, and I really need to give you a refund. And she said, oh, what do we need a refund for? He said, well, because you've had problems. He said, you've been offline for a while and we need to compensate you. And she said, oh, hang on a minute. She said, I'm just going to get my team leader. She said, I'll get those details for you. Team leader switched on. And she was straight in disciplinary action. She should have spotted this, especially after just undertaking her security training, where we tell them about security spoofing. Telephone spoofing. So she was a victim, yes, but really, I mean, surely we're all wise enough. My nana, she might not be wise enough to understand Mr. Microsoft on the phone is actually a fraud, but when you've just sat security training, surely you should have a little bit of extra knowledge. But sure enough, there it was. Accidental disclosure or modification. So as we just talked about, for the AIDS clinic, there was an accidental disclosure which actually caused a lot of people serious distress. Disgruntled employee making unauthorised changes. Any examples of them? No? Oh, I love those. But we tell them, business owners will tell me, well, I trust my staff. Well, that's great. Okay, can you fend off all of their accidents? What do you mean? Someone accidentally sending the wrong email to someone, accidentally leaving a USB stick without a password in the car park. You know, how are you going to protect against the accident? It's all very well trusting your staff, but can they be wholly trusted, considering that they're your biggest risk? Definitely not. So, incidents must be reported to the ICO within 72 hours. And that's 72 hours of you noticing the incident. So the incident could have happened a couple of years ago, but you've only just found out about it, so we're going to let them know now. But there only are certain conditions where you need to report. So on grand scale, are thousands of people affected? Is special categories of personal data involved in the breach? So there's a number of ifs, and if these are yeses, then we would report to the ICO. But the ICO have a lovely checklist online, so you can check that checklist, and if it all comes back yes, then you're going to need to let them know that something's happened. If it comes back no, you're good. Key point here is if personal data goes missing and it's encrypted, you don't need to report it. And it doesn't matter if it's thousands upon thousands, millions of data subject contained within whatever's been stolen. If it's encrypted, it does not need to be reported. So this is why it's a key control. I won't call it a silver bullet, as is it David who pointed out last time. Hold a gun to somebody's head and threaten them enough and you'll get that password. So again, we're humans and we're not fail-safe. Subject access requests. So if you are a controller, and we've seen lots and lots of these, not many actually that we could reject. So over time, especially working with recruitment agencies, so I've been working with a few of them over the last few years, and they're gits really with your data. They will harvest it from online sources, which they're allowed to do. It's publicly available information. It's the way they use it which gets people's backs up. And of all of the different organisations I've been working with over the last few years with GDPR, recruitment agencies have been stung with subject access requests. And me turning around to them and saying, you're going to have to meet it, I'm sorry, you've got no legal basis. Well, can't we go this and can't we do that? Well, actually, no. They're exercising their rights, you've got 30 days to get on with it. which is very interesting when somebody's asking for deletion from a marketing list and they've got all sorts of different backups going on. So yeah, trying to get the data deleted from your backups is a real nightmare. The SARs are definitely our way of exercising our control over our data. So we have absolutely every right to use our rights in order to make a subject access request, restrict, object, erase, or just even see what data they have on us. We can also ask where they got the data from, which quite often is a hairy question, especially for recruitment agencies. So yeah, there's a few people who have written into recruitment agencies and saying, how are you even contacting me? Where did you get my data from? I want to know this. How much data have you got? Where did you get it from? You're amazed at how many recruitment agencies buy data that they shouldn't be having. They actually buy chunks of data which is now illegal because they don't have consent. So, and again, access is the only absolute right. So we can phone up anybody or write to them, put in a subject access request and have all of our data delivered to us, everything that they have about us, even our behavioural stuff, our clicks, websites visited, we can have all of that. And of course, those requests have to be met within 30 days. If they are not met within 30 days, the organisation must have responded to you within the 30 days to say, yes, we're doing this and this is how long it's going to take. So the biggest subject access request I saw, like that, he wanted it all in paper format. It was absolutely horrendous. So the consequences, and we are going to look at, in a minute about who's been stung so far. So for the organisation, higher fines, so for the heavier breaches, 4% of global annual turnover, and that's for your entire organisation, not just your parent company, not just the part of the organisation that had the breach, it is your entire global organisation. There are lower fines for lesser breaches, and they could be up to 2% of annual global turnover. Improvement notices, so we've seen an awful lot of these. So this is what the ICO are keen on doing at the moment, is going out to a premises where they've had a breach or whether somebody has complained, and they check what they have done. Where it's not quite right, they will issue you, or where it's horribly wrong, they will issue you an improvement notice and give you a set amount of time to put that problem right. And then they come back and check on you. If you don't do anything, you're going to get a fine. So the improvement notice, much like the health and safety executive, they can come out and do the same thing, come out and say, oh, health and safety is horrible. Here's an improvement notice, you've got this amount of time to put it right. This is exactly what this is. And of course, there's costs associated with these breaches. So there's potential civil action that we as data subjects can bring against an organisation, and from my understanding there were quite a few patients from the AIDS clinic who did exactly that, and I can't say that I blame them. We also have possible criminal charges and possible civil action, and of course for directors, you've got your bad press, nobody wants that, their name in the press, but possible criminal charges. So you can actually go to prison now, and we actually saw our first prison case this year. Nationwide, did anybody hear about that guy? No, great. So Nationwide got away completely scot-free. They had a breach that involved, I think it was over 110,000 customer details. And this was breached, the ICO was involved, and they looked at Nationwide and said, actually, what you're doing is great. You're protecting the data, you've got a written framework, you're auditing yourselves, you're training your staff, doing all the good things you should be doing. What actually happened was the staff member stepped outside the realms of his training, his contracts, his agreements, and he siphoned information from their system to sell. He went to prison for 6 months. He was sentenced this year. So this is the first prosecution we've seen under the new DPA, and rightfully so. And I hope that that draws out a message to any other employee that actually they're not going to stand for that rubbish. They're really not. We see this actually happen a lot in recruitment agencies. So, I gather you all heard about this breach. So Facebook have been fined the maximum fine under the old DPA, which unfortunately was only 500,000. Under GDPR, it would have been 1.626 billion. So that's a hefty old fine. And basically, they were fined because the ICO found that Facebook had no control over the third parties who had access to the personal data that they were collecting. So they made no effort to put them into contracts to say what they can and can't do with the data. They made no effort to go out and check what they were doing with the data. There was nothing in place to say how they must secure the data. So it was just going off willy-nilly. And that willy-nilly company was Cambridge Analytica. So I'm sure you all heard of them as well. So Cambridge Analytica have also received the maximum fine under the old DPA. How they are still in business, I will never know. But the ICO have promised us they're going after criminal charges for the directors. We're still waiting 2 years later. But we do hope that it will happen. What they were doing with the data was completely illegal. It was all about voting preferences, so they were using the data from Facebook to predict voting outcomes, and this is completely illegal, completely against the law. So not only were they using the data illegally, they were actually committing a further offence against another law by using it to predict voting outcomes. So pretty savage, really. Facebook were just letting them have our data to do it. And you think of the complications of that. How many of us have had our votes swayed through what we've seen through our social media profiles? It can happen. And it does happen. These guys did it. So, rightfully so, I wish they were fined under the new DPA, because then they definitely would be out of business. So just to give a few examples of who has been hit, and they've been in the news. So Ashley Madison, ring any bells with anyone? No. Ooh. So Ashley Madison are a website, and they have been set up in order to help married people cheat on their partners. So you can sign up and have sex with other married people who are also looking to cheat on their spouses.
The data dump for that is awesome.
It is. It is. It is. So yeah, a bunch of hackers got in, and like you said, data dump, it was huge, and it was a huge breach. It was Ashley Madison. They hadn't done any pen testing whatsoever. There were vulnerabilities left, right and centre which had been exploited. Lo and behold, all of the personal data was extracted, and some of it was actually used to hold people to ransom. Guess what I know about you, and I'm going to tell your wife unless you pay up. New type of ransom. But you know, I find it hard to feel sorry for them. I do, because there are some times where it just works like poetry.
And they're still in business. All of these companies are
They
all
are
in business
still in business. Isn't it amazing?
No casualties.
Indeed. Wow, you say that. But how many people are actually going to sign up there now? I know I wouldn't. Talk. So, unfortunately,
Again and again and again.
it is again and again and again. How these guys are still in business, I will never know. And you know, the adverts.
Competition.
The adverts this year, how you can trust TalkTalk, and we've improved our security programs, and da-da-da-da-da. And I looked at it and thought, right, well, they've gone and got certified, surely. Nothing of the sort. They haven't even got Cyber Essentials certification. So, yeah, why they think that they're suddenly secure, I don't know. Heathrow, as we said, 200-odd laptops every week handed in, most of which won't have a password. PlayStation goes down every Christmas. eBay, very recently. Dixon's Carphone Warehouse is now the biggest breach in history. So over 1 million, well over 1 million of us affected. Basically, if you ever bought a product from Carphone Warehouse, you are affected, essentially. Your data has been compromised. We yet to see what the fine is going to be on that one. But it does look like it's under GDPR, so that should be a hefty one. NHS, WannaCry. Unfortunately, that cost 1.67 billion to put it right, of taxpayers' money. You can't afford that kind of thing. And it was all down to the NHS not being able to upgrade their systems. Simple as that. So, yeah, there's a good few examples. Tesco's. Now, Martin taught me how to do this online. So Tesco's actually suffered a hack, which is what you teach to young hackers, to fledgling hackers. This is the first type of stuff you learn through WebGo. And their vulnerability was so bad that you could actually use, much like you do on WebGo, and leave the code open. And it tricks the system into thinking that the password has been put in. And this happened to a number of Tesco's customers, and as a result, their bank accounts were frozen, and they were like that for the entire weekend, until they sorted out the problem. But that was a very simple vulnerability that with checking, pen testing, been picked up straight away. Even just an SSL scan in some cases. It will tell you what you're vulnerable to. But they don't do these things. It's just a quick fix. Make money. But that's the problem. And that's why we're looking at developers. This is why we want these things pen tested, white box tested, black box tested. This is the good stuff. And this is how you ensure your outputs are secure. You patch it before it goes. And then you're not in the firing line. Tesco's aren't coming back to you and saying, what the hell? Because they didn't know it's going to happen either. Fortunately, Tesco's aren't tech people. So third-party control, so as you can probably understand, this is really important. If you are going to share personal data or even just business data with third parties, you absolutely need to have a contract in place that details what they can and can't do with the data and how it must be protected. That is absolute key. If you don't, you could end up like Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, in the glare of the media yet again. They need to be assessed. So it's not just the contract. It's easy to sign a contract. You need to check them against it. Best way to do that is to audit them. Send out an auditor, give the auditor the contract and say, make sure though they're meeting those requirements. If they're not, we need to be getting out there and improving them. Or they're in breach of contract, either way you want to go. So, and use specific security agreements when necessary. So I've seen a lot of companies that use standard contracts. They've all got confidentiality clauses within them. Not often do they address security. So if you need a security, a separate agreement is absolutely fine under the law, and I'd strongly advise you use it because it makes it specific. Oh, blimey, that went quick. So in summary, we need to be mindful of the day-to-day use of personal data. So if you are given data by a controller to use within your applications, make sure you are using it in line with the contract or the agreement in place. Look after the data you and your employees have access to. So it's not just you who's got to worry about what you're doing, it's everybody working below you. You are responsible for them. If something goes wrong, the finger's going to be pointed at you. Report all incidents and SARS to your designated person. Do you have a designated person? Might want one. So, and of course, implement security policies. So everybody hates policies, but the fact is, if you've got a policy and you're sticking to it, the ICO are immediately going to go, well, hey, you've got something written down and you're checking yourself against it. You can't get much better than that. Of course, use the ICO guidance. So there's a lot of ICO guidance at the moment. It is actually very good. From small to large businesses, if you are working for a large business or you are a large business, I would strongly suggest getting a consultant or similar in. But if you are a small business, then the ICO guidance is perfect. Absolutely no need for a consultant whatsoever. So further information, you can always go on to the ICO website, as we just said, wealth of information there. The National Cyber Security Centre, and of course OWASP. So that would be your biggest one. OWASP, I've actually had a good look over the last few weeks at the stuff that's available. It's actually really, really good stuff. I would strongly suggest you use their secure development cycles. It is just superb. So yeah, the checking, the suggestions that are made, absolutely implement those. So that was me. That was over quite quick, a lot quicker than I thought it was. But thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, fire away.
I'll do one. So first of all, thank you for making a subject that I usually fall asleep in interesting. Now, you mentioned earlier about applying to commercial organisations, and you also put the NHS up there. How much does this apply to governments and departments as well? It applies to everyone, and more so government departments. I see government with huge opt-outs.
Yeah. Yeah, so with government departments, local councils is actually a really good one. If we think about DPOs, there are only 3 conditions where you'd need a DPO. Large-scale processing, special categories processing, and if you're a local authority. That's it. That's the only reasons you would need a DPO. So the councils, the government departments, they are more heavily controlled by this, it seems, than the private sector. So yeah, how the fines are going to go on that remains to be seen. But yeah, they are as much regulated by this, if not more, than the private sector.
And similarly with international organisations operating, I'm thinking of people like, I don't know, NATO or the International Standards Organisation,
yeah.
Or people like that.
Yeah.
And how does that apply to them?
Absolutely. If they are processing data of European data subjects, it absolutely applies to them no matter where they are in the world. So it all depends on what data you're collecting, as Facebook have already found out. So the ICO have fined them, and they're in America. So yeah, yes. it does apply.
Another thing, I read a lot on Hacker Child, and I see hacker groups putting GDPR in so that they don't get fined for
Yeah.
having data protection controllers within their
Yeah.
organisations.
Yeah.
It's
It's a bit surreal.
yes, it's one less thing for them to get. They can go to prison for criminal things, but they
Yeah.
won't get sued.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's exactly the point.
Yeah.
So again, it depends on what hacker
And
group.
so you get hackers group registering themselves with the local information commissioner office.
Well, only if they're, well,
Yeah.
they should be. I can't say whether they
Yeah.
are. They should be if they are gathering information above a certain.
Oh, they gather
amount.
everything. Yes.
Yeah. So if there's a certain amount of data subjects they have information on, then they would absolutely have to register themselves as data controllers. Yeah.
No, they just register it, and yeah,
It's
really
quite
fascinating.
bizarre, isn't it? Oh, we'll abide by that part of the law. Don't come and get me, but we're going to hack you behind your backs because that's completely illegal in itself. So yeah, Misuse of Computers Act covers hacking, and it's completely against the law.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I know. But it's the fact that that's criminal. Yeah, we're quite happy going to prison, but we don't get this one.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't want any civil action. The thing behind that is that if you load up a website and you're one of me, the first thing you look for is a privacy policy, cookies policy, and that's probably what they're trying to avoid is attention. So if you get somebody like me go onto the website and say, oh my goodness, you haven't got a privacy policy, and we let the ICO know, the ICO are going to be putting their noses in potentially where they may not prior to this. So that it's probably just a cover. In order to put a privacy policy together, you don't just write one. You have to do this huge data discovery exercise to make sure that you know about the data that you're managing. And once you have done this, you can then start putting together a retention policy, privacy policy, so on and so forth. So you can almost, I have a strong feeling that they haven't done that kind of work, and the privacy policy is just a show.
Boilerplate. Yes.
It also reduces your risk exposure, because one of the things that you want, if you're doing hacking commercially, then the last thing you want is to make it so that it's very easy to prosecute you.
Yeah.
And so what you do is you reduce the number of things where you're breaking the law,
Yeah.
so you apply legal processes
yes.
to everything that you do,
Do you see
except
the
the things that are really illegal. It's like when you go to the States and they get you to sign the piece of paper that says,
Are you a terrorist?
are you a terrorist, etc., etc. The only reason they do that is so that if you are a terrorist, they can immediately deport you because you've lied on a form. It's nothing to do with whether or not you're stupid enough to say, yes, I'm a terrorist. It's purely so that they can deport you. So it's the same sort of thing. It's all about reducing the risk on their behalf.
So, anyone else?
So I've got a question about subject access rights.
Mhm.
It's obvious when you ask for your data that you get something back.
Yes.
There is no loop closure when you ask for deletion. You have no
They
idea
have
they're
to
going
co-
to
well,
decide
They have to confirm to you in writing within 30 days.
that. Yeah.
You could
What
always do
they
another
have
subject
done.
matter request,
But that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't.
You can engineer your own check, I'm sure, to ask somebody else in the call centre to go and get it back for you. Yeah, all right.
Yeah. So yeah,
But
the
once you ask for
company.
it to be deleted, you then put another SAR in
Yeah.
and say, so a month later, and see if it's there. Easy.
Well, the key one that
They
I've
hang
seen
themselves.
actually is that data subjects will exercise the right to erasure, especially in marketing purposes. I'm one of these data subjects, and I've exercised my right. I've had the company come back to me within 30 days to say we've deleted all your data, and the next month I got more marketing emails, which says to me, you haven't deleted my data. We actually had this with Felixstowe Academy. So my children left Felixstowe Academy. My son is my youngest. He left a year and a half ago. There is absolutely no reason for them to be sending me parent bulletins. And to be honest, they're so frequent, I get fed up with them. So I wrote back to them and said, look, my children are no longer at your school. I really don't want your parent bulletins anymore. Can you remove me from the mailing list? So they came back to me and said, yep, we've done that. We've deleted your data from the mailing list and you won't receive any more updates. The very following Monday, I got another. And it went on for weeks. I just don't know what was happening. It seemed to me like it was just a quick reply to say, yeah, we'll do that. But we're not actually going to do it. So yeah, we don't actually know
So
to what extent this is
if
happening.
that check fails, or they obviously out themselves as not having
Mhm.
done it, what's your next recourse?
ICO.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the ICO recommend that if you're going to exercise your data subject rights, you would do so, you would allow the company 30 days to respond to you, to give you your result. If you're not satisfied with that result, you can then complain because you've given it the 30 days, you've done the legal stuff from your perspective. If you suspect that they haven't met your request in the way that you would expect them to, let the ICO know once that 30 days is up. So yeah, the ICO will act on your behalf, they will. It might take them time though.
When this was coming in, we had an evil idea that on day one, if as many people as possible submitted the appropriate
I think that actually happened.
I was going to ask you, are you aware of anyone actually attempting it? We just thought of it over a lunchtime conversation. Yeah,
So the subject access requests, I can't remember the percentage it was, but there was something like 46,000 subject access requests submitted in London alone, to London businesses alone in the first month.
We actually had a mitigation strategy in place in our own company for that, in case it happened.
Yeah, good idea, very good idea. But yeah, unfortunately, a lot of companies were hit that way. They were. Well, I say unfortunately, some of them were fortunate. You think, serves you right.
Okay. One other thing, which is that for the last 3 years, we've been operating 2 of the government's verified portals for authenticating people to the government service. They are a terrible data controller.
Yeah.
They are the worst. GDS were dreadful.
Yeah.
They just slippy-shouldered every request straight to us and all of our colleagues, other organisations. So we basically had to do all their work for them.
Yeah, that sounds about right. They're not the only ones who
We're not
did
doing
that,
it anymore.
unfortunately.
We've bailed.
Yeah, no. Well, this is the thing, push back. You're the controller. Here's your responsibilities. We're the processor.
Yeah.
Here's our responsibilities. We need something in writing. And yeah,
said, do you want to get paid or not?
Yeah, see, that's the go-to.
Because it's
And you think, how do you fight a government outfit? This
exactly.
is the thing.
So we didn't, we walked away.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Good. Excellent. So yeah, Netflix is one that I had a bit of a go at. Did anybody get the privacy policy on Netflix? That was horrific. The privacy policy should be maximum of 2 pages. It should be able, or you should be able to read it if you're 13 years old, because you're allowed to give consent at 13 for your data. And Netflix, I think it was 48 pages, 42 pages. I did sit and read the whole lot, much to my family's dismay, because we were waiting to watch a film. But
on the telly, wow.
So I sat and read the whole thing, and I'm sitting there and I'm taking notes at the same time, and I'm getting awfully bored. And through the whole way through, I mean, this massive section, a good 4 or 5 pages on the security of your data. And I read it all the way to the end, and I still couldn't understand how they were securing my data. It was just a load of waffle about how we take pride in securing our data, our customers' data, and we'll ensure that nothing will happen untoward with your data. We'll protect your data. And it was just a load of rubbish. There was actually no information in there that told me how they protect my data. You know, you've got our access control policy, you're encrypting my data. How are you controlling your third parties? And that was the other issue I had, is the amount of third parties that Netflix share your data with. It is unreal. And there's no need. There's only 2 of them that they rely on for functionality. Everything else is marketing. And that's where they get a lot of their money from, is selling on this data, behavioural data in many cases. It's the types of films you watch, what you're into, what you're clicking on. And this is all being sold on and used against you, essentially. And they want you to spend money. Ooh.
So I read the one for Amazon Prime Video as well.
Yes.
And the reason I did this, I was in an Airbnb in Prague, and the previous occupant of the Airbnb had left themselves logged into the smart TV in the living room. They were a baseball fan, American, probably based on their recommendations. So I filled it up with My Little Pony videos instead. So whenever they log into the Amazon Prime Video back home, now they'll get recommended. But
it was you.
But it was kind of interesting that because you can log into Amazon Prime Video on anywhere in the world, they were absolutely certain that they wouldn't allow you not to take your data elsewhere because the service wouldn't work elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one, that. I would like to know how Netflix and those Amazon Prime are going to get around the portability right. But yeah.
Smart TVs are interesting because they're hugely subsidised by the fact that when you buy a smart TV, it then feeds all your information back.
Everything
so
you watch
the purchase contract is something where all of these things are, you're automatically opted into them.
Yeah.
And so sooner or later, someone's going to realise that their smart TV is actually spying on them.
Yeah.
And it's one of those stories that is sat there and no one's actually mentioned it yet.
Yeah.
But that's
Look at
why it's so
Alexa.
cheap.
I mean, Alexa's been in the news recently, and this, to be honest, I mean, it gobsmacked me. I won't let my fella have one. End of. I know what they can do. I know they're listening all the time. Of course they are. Alexa. It's got to be listening all of the time in order to pick up your commands. And people are up in arms at the moment. Oh, employees at Amazon are listening to our conversations. Well, what did you honestly think was going to happen? You know, we're human beings. We're naturally curious. If you had the opportunity to spy on your neighbours, would you do it? Honestly? Yeah, you probably would. But that's what Amazon employees are doing. They're having a listen in. And unfortunately, some of them have admitted to it, and now it's an uproar. But this is what they do. This is what it is. It's a smart device. It's listening. It's connected to the internet. People are listening to you. It's not just a machine that sits out. I mean, I'm sure that my mum thinks that the cloud is a cloud, and that Alexa sits in a cloud. You know, this is the kind of technical knowledge that people have, and they just expect that these things work and that they're safe, and far from it. Very far from it. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.